From the height of summer to the depths of winter, through bad times and good times, in safety and danger, these boots will always hold a special place in my heart, because even if I hadn't worn them during some of the most defining moments in my life, they hold other meaning aside from being great boots in terms of quality materials, durable construction, a supportive and comfortable fit, and versatility to be worn in a vast range of situations. That's because they're Viberg boots, which originate from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. A place I have a personal connection to, with overwhelmingly positive memories of the times I was there. So basically, it's like supporting a local business for me. The story begins with me seeing this interesting variation of the classic Viberg service boot, which they call the Navvy boot. That isn't a mispronunciation or misspelling. The spelling is like Navy but with 2 V's. Navvy is an older word that used to be more commonly used to refer to a laborer, usually one that works on civil engineering projects, like the construction of canals and railways. The last is Viberg's signature 2030 last. The upper material is called earth chamois, a kind of oiled nubuck or roughout. Normally people say chamois or chamois. I'll stick to chamois, earth chamois. Anyways, in contrast to most service boots on the 2030 last with 270-degree double row stitch down construction, these are made with a 360-degree antique scalloped welt, leading to that well-proportioned and refined outline of the signature 2030 last, being combined with a more rugged and unique appearance, while still managing to look sharp. In fact, these are among the tougher variations of Viberg's in the 2030 last, because earth chamois is more abrasion resistant. The 360-degree antique scalloped welt provides more water resistance, and the ridgeway outsoles provide increased grip without being too clunky or heavy. When these arrived, they did indeed look like the store page images. Earth chamois will of course look different depending on lighting conditions and the background, but in general there are almost always undertones similar to charcoal gray. As you may know, charcoal gray is a great color for styling and matching outfits of all types and formalities. For example, gray sweatpants and sweatshirts to chinos, and a charcoal gray suit can be worn with lots of different clothes and accessories in lots of different settings. For being a textured upper material like suede, earth chamois doesn't vary that much based on lighting conditions, which I prefer for darker colors like this. It makes matching more outfits much easier. At a distance, they almost look black, especially when not in direct lighting, or when not around brighter blue and brown tones. However, when in direct light and or around more vibrant blue and brown tones, the deep brown color becomes apparent, though it's overall quite subtle, just like rich earth on fertile land. That deep dark brown soil color with slight variations. The product details also say the ridgeway sole is brown. Yes, this appears to be true, but only under certain conditions. Most of the time it'll appear black. The dark brown leather midsole, coffee brass eyelets, and speed hooks with an antique coat finishing, alongside the brown antique scalloped welt, help add additional slight variations, resulting in a look that leans more towards monochromatic, rather than sharply contrasting. Something that helps these be dressed up more easily. Essentially, the moderately rough texture and dark color allow these boots to be worn seamlessly with a t-shirt and a range of pants, to chambray and button-up shirts, to sweaters and jackets. This is invaluable for me because I rarely feel under or overdressed for the formality of a situation. I can wear these when just relaxing with family and friends, while also being able to walk in them in more run-down, less developed, or simply dangerous areas, without attracting unwanted attention, yet still being presentable. Then they can also be worn in some more upscale places and not stand out either. A lot of this versatility has to do with the brogue cap toe, which is even more subtle on these compared to other variations of it in smooth leathers or lighter colored suede and rough-out versions of Viberg's that use the 2030 last. It simply proportions out the front to accentuate the almond-shaped dress shoe look for higher formality. while not popping out too much when there's a need to be more casual and inconspicuous. Like with cap-toe boots in dark brown waxed suedes or rough-outs, the cap-toe detailing helps contribute to an optical distraction that helps reduce the appearance of any blemishes that come from inevitable scratching and scuffing of the earth chamois. A characteristic that brings me to my next point about versatility in terms of types of activity and not necessarily social formality. These Navvy boots are certainly no hiking, combat, or work boots, yet they can still take me into more demanding activities, in that they can protect my feet when doing moderate to light work, and be capable in more severe weather. The ridgeway sole does add weight, but it isn't too significant. What is significant is the enhanced traction from the tread pattern, which also helps the outsole not feel too stiff, since those ridges in the pattern help give a degree of flex. There's also an ideal balance between adequate ankle support and ankle mobility. Normally, slightly more room in the ankle area would contribute to a worse fit, but not here, largely because of the curving and tapering at the heel area, which gives me one of the best fits of any boot around the back of my feet. This slight feature really helps secure the heel without being constricting. I have another pair of Vibergs on the 2030 last in a smooth veg tan leather. They also fit great around the heel. That pair is also a great fit throughout the rest of the boots after a long break-in. However, since earth chamois doesn't conform that much compared to a smooth veg tan leather, the instep and pinky areas of my one slightly larger foot have slight pressure if I wear the boots for a long time. Tying the laces more loosely helps, but then they become undone more easily, of course. Actually, in some clips, I did this and the laces became undone, but the boot still had a good fit, almost like wearing a Chelsea or other non-laced boot. The toe puff is leather and not a plastic compound, which can be found even in many other heritage boots. This helped reduce the pressure on my pinky toe to a degree as the boots wore in. The issue with my instep and pinky toe gradually lessened, but still results in some discomfort and even a small red mark occasionally if I wear these for an extended time. By extended time, I mean well over 12 hours. On several occasions, I've worn these for almost 2 days straight, and even fell asleep in them, and I was fine. Comfort and support are good for the footbed or insole if you prefer. There's enough arch support, not that I really need much. And as with any boot made of full or almost all leather, comfort keeps getting better over time. The tan kip lining also adds to comfort. Just for reference, I followed the normal sizing advice and went down one full number. So, my 8.5D US Brannick measurement translates to a UK 7.5, and then an E width in Viberg system which almost always has E as the default width. These can be worn from 5 to 25 degrees Celsius, and even go up to 35 degrees Celsius with some discomfort of course, but even then they still breathe reasonably well. Amazingly, they can also go down to -5 degrees Celsius and still be alright. I mean, there'll still be a chill after a while, but you won't be freezing. Unless you submerge these in snow and water and don't move. Part of this has to do with the earth chamois upper being thick enough, providing adequate insulation at those lower temperatures, as well as the oily coat which helps repel moisture, debris, and regulate temperature to an extent. Kind of like how keeping your skin, hair, and lips moisturized helps in cold weather. The oil is noticeable, but it's not like it readily rubs off. Even when new, the oil was well soaked in, and barely, if any, rubbed onto my hands or pants. Then there's even less heat loss due to conduction with the ground, because together the ridgeway sole, leather midsole, and insole provide enough insulation. Yet in the heat, the leather midsole and the earth chamois upper still allow for a degree of breathability, so my feet don't sweat that much or freeze that much in either extreme. Traction with the ridgeway soles is good in winter conditions, but of course sometimes snow compacts around the heel or toe area, and I need to shake it off to regain better traction. Though even when there's a layer of compacted snow, there's still decent traction. Snow, no matter how deep, is still relatively safe to walk in terms of traction. The real test comes with ice, where there's usually not much of a problem when there's still some snow mixed in, especially on relatively flat surfaces. It's actually quite amazing. And although possible, I wouldn't suggest trying to pick up some speed. I still need to be careful with how I step when walking. It just takes that one time where enough ice has melted on the surface and it's smooth enough for even the grippiest sole to slip up. Now just a side note, that last detail from the product page about French binding refers to this leather along the edge. It isn't necessary but adds to the more quality feel when picking up the boots. It's also just a bit more comfortable when wearing, and I suppose protects the edges to an extent. Back to the ridgeway outsole. The tread pattern does make it relatively easy to repel most dirt. Normally, they pick up far less debris than a commando sole, instead often being more similar to a day-night or flatter kind of rubber sole. Sometimes you can just shake or strike the soles for most of the dirt and debris to fall off. As for the tongue, it's not gusseted, so water can enter the boot more easily. However, as shown here, it took me several minutes of splashing around in somewhat realistic conditions before water splashed just right to enter one boot. Of course, if these are submerged up to the eyelets, water will rush in, but in this kind of situation, no water got through the welt. You know, like those times you're trying to tread through a small puddle or stream. You're going along and you get stuck under some log or branch, making a few seconds or minutes feel like a few hours. Interestingly, no water got in from this part of the test, which is obviously sped up at 3 times speed right now. When water finally did get in, it was actually just from relatively normal walking in this water. But when I took higher steps, so the water splashed higher, allowing water to enter as you would expect around the tongue area. It wasn't much, and it went away quickly because I was wearing wool socks. Though even if water doesn't get past the tongue, it can be an inconvenience that there will often be movement to one side, even after a curve developed. Maybe kilties or a false tongue would help, where there's a piece of leather on the outside of the tongue. Or maybe in the future I'll look into getting a stitch on the tongue, and even see if adding a gusset is possible. I suppose a gusset or even a false tongue on the outside could add bulk to the boot, especially around the instep and ankle area. I think the reason Viberg doesn't have a gusset is to keep a more slim outline. Again, it's not like these are hiking or work boots. I just occasionally do these kinds of more demanding activities in these boots. But it's still been good to find out these boots can be worn into tougher terrain or when I occasionally need to do some more manual work that isn't too demanding or requires heavy-duty safety features. So aside from relatively minor issues like no gusset and slight pressure in some areas, I've gotten used to these boots and I can still wear them almost anywhere, anytime, for any amount of time. And I'll definitely be wearing them for years and hopefully decades into the future. As for boot care, it's basically the same as what I said in my very first video reviewing the Grantstone diesel boots in Loden suede. Except you might want to use a stiffer wire brush for initial cleaning. The type of brush with copper bristles and a regular suede brush on the other side. The stiffer metal bristles make it easier to take dirt off the oiled texture of earth chamois. Then the regular suede brush can be used to get the texture of earth chamois back to a more uniform look. Using waterproofing spray isn't necessary, even for reducing stain potential and repelling moist dirt, because the oil already helps with that. So the only extra thing to do once in a blue moon would be to re-oil the earth chamois upper. When the softer oil texture and smell begin to dissipate and the boots begin feeling drier, you'll know it's time. Or you could decide to oil them if you go into dry and or dusty conditions more frequently. I've worn these in dry and cold and dry and hot conditions with dust, but usually only for 1 week to 1 month at a time. So there was only a minor bit of drying of the oil in those harsher conditions. On to the topic of the higher price of Viberg boots. I think if I didn't have that personal connection to the region Viberg is from, I probably wouldn't have bought them so easily. The quality materials and skilled labor needed to make these boots would sway me towards saying the price is worth it. The labor does drive up the cost a lot, considering these are made in Canada and especially British Columbia where it's even more expensive to live. But again, if I didn't have that connection to the area and wasn't interested in the history and skill of boot making, I wouldn't have cared or given that much thought to the cost of labor. but I would still accept part of the cost from Viberg's excellent selection of materials. On a related note, Viberg is a relatively small operation, so they don't have the advantage of scale to reduce costs. As for the great fit around the heel, that's something I haven't found a match for. So for me, that would be another point in favor of buying Viberg. There are some boots that come close, like certain makeups of the Grant Stone Diesel boot, but nothing quite like the Viberg fit that I found yet, especially at a lower price point. Well, the great fit might be a deal maker for some people, but absolutely having to wear one single brand or model of footwear for health reasons would be extremely rare. Usually a good fit can be achieved by sacrificing the signature aesthetic of the 2030 last, along with this particular makeup with the Earth Chamois and Ridgeway sole combination. Just like most products, you can get something relatively comparable at a lower price point for some trade-offs. Objective rationalizations for spending more often comes down to the higher tier of materials and construction. However, less commonly and more difficult to articulate is the often subjective and intangible experience. Things like comfort, fit, and feel of the boots, all the way to factors like history, prestige, and sentimental reasons. Kind of like how people care to spend more on bringing meaning through symbolic items, such as watches and bags. Except in this case, boots can be more practical than those items and still hold similar meaning. This kind of thinking could even extend to why people spend more on nice restaurants, camping gear, trips to concerts and conventions, or planning their dream vacation. These types of things aren't entirely necessary to live and could even be called luxuries for pleasure, only serving the purpose of adding something unique to daily life. Wearing this kind of revered footwear could fall into that category too. Then another reason these boots could be worth it is if they're part of 5 or less pairs of footwear someone owns, and they wear these regularly for at least a decade. After all, the cost per wear can drop a lot, given how many different situations these can be worn in. Well, if you made it this far, thank you for listening to my thoughts and story. There's a good chance you also like boots and heritage style a lot. So follow Time Travel Style and check out the website from time to time to find out more about quality goods made to last, discover interesting stories from travel, and enter the occasional giveaway. That's all for now. See you again soon.